to get this meeting underway. I will take a motion to move into executive session.
I'll move it. Second.
All in favor? Great.
Yeah,
Good.
those days are over, Rick. Crawl under, makes me crawl under, but I shouldn't get back up. Here we go.
I finally received.
I'll take a motion to bring us back into a public session.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. Pertaining to our executive session, the board has decided that we are not going to make a recommendation at this time due to conflicts on the board. We have members that have self-identified as having potential conflict of interest with this ordinance. So therefore, no recommendation today. That being said, I will open this up to public comment.
Are we gonna start with this? Because we have a. No, this is the first thing. Oh, it is. Okay.
There's a public hearing open.
Yeah. Anybody? Public comment?
Run through the Zoom rules.
Oh, Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Please hold your comments until the select board chairman opens the agenda items for public comment. When addressing the board, state your full name, both in person and on Zoom. It is suggested that you enter your full name as your ID on Zoom. And I would like to follow that up with a suggestion that you please keep your comments as brief as you can. And we've already heard a point that has been, if someone is making a point that's been made, we probably won't spend a lot of time on that. Okay, we'll simply say thank you. Okay, we're trying to keep this short and as informative as possible. Okay. Sam.
Hi, my name is Sam McGee, year-round resident, Mount Desert. I have a lot of questions about this proposed ordinance. The biggest one for me is around the caps. My first question is, I want to get a sense for how many dwelling units we currently have in the town of Mount Desert. And then out of that number, how many are currently owned by seasonal homeowners? In other words, they're not being used by year-round residents. And what does that work out to as a number and as a percentage? And how does that potentially relate to this 10% cap? And then what was the rationale behind coming up with the 10% cap? Because I'm personally opposed to a cap.
9%. 9%.
It's 10.
Oh, it's 10. I did, it's 9 in the paperwork. So it's 9. When I read the draft, it said 9. Whatever the cap.
Yeah, whatever the cap is. It's
Arbitrary.
I know I threw out a lot of questions, but maybe we could shed some light. I'm just trying to get some context as to the rationale behind the cap, how we came up with it, and how that relates to the number of seasonal homes that are already in the town, which could potentially all be rushing to sign up for licenses this first year.
Well, I'm Jeff Wood. I'm gonna be cautious because I'm one of the people who has an apartment that I rent during the summer, so that's one of the people with a conflict. All of this discussion around short-term rentals and various other housing issues and the preservation of this community have to do with the available housing units. And we don't know, quite frankly, exactly how many full-blown properties are rental properties exclusively, either by people that are only living here for a couple of months or by people who have bought them as an investment property to generate revenue. So we hope to find that out. And you are correct that if there's a person that owns a home that they want to keep for themselves for summer, that they would be required. Well, not if they're not going to rent it, but they would, if they were going to rent it at all, they would have to get a license, which is a very nominal, quite frankly, amount. But what was this? Do you want to?
The figure that I got from Derlin, I guess from Kyle, was 2,611 properties in the town.
Dwellings.
Excuse me?
Dwellings.
Dwellings. And we estimate that there are approximately 420 rental properties currently. It's an estimation. Those are a combination of what we would call vacation rentals, in other words, investment properties, or short-term rentals, which are people's rentals in their primary residence. So 10% would be 261, but that would only apply to vacation rentals. There is no cap for primary residence rentals or homes that can only be summer homes, seasonal homes. There's no cap.
The answer is a little bit, we don't know, but our best guess is 16%.
No, that's, we don't know exactly what the breakdown is as far as the 60, we estimate based on the data we have collected that 16, if those 420 rental units are not broken into like one property with 3 garage apartments,
Yeah.
we will find out. But if that's, even if you split those in half, we're not quite at the cap at this point. And I lost my train of thought. Oh my God.
Aren't you at the cap? And then that,
It is possible that we're at the cap.
and then doesn't that ultimately create an unfair situation, not dissimilar to trying to get a mooring in Northeast Harbor, where there's too few moorings to go around or too few rental licenses to go around? And if I didn't happen to be clever enough to come down here quick enough and sign up for a license for this thing, then I might get boxed out, and then I might be on the list for 20 years, or my kids might be, and then I'm subject to a lottery system, which seems arbitrary and unfair. And so I'm opposed to a cap. If the goals of this ordinance are to promote life safety and make sure people have sprinklers and follow rules in their house and have smoke detectors and all that kind of stuff, I can kind of wrap my mind around it, but to put a limit on it, I think you're gonna have unfair outcomes where one class of property owners is gonna potentially benefit over another, and I just think that that's unfair and potentially unconstitutional.
I agree.
Well, I guess that the safety issue wasn't really the driving force behind the development of a cap. The development of a cap was more directly connected to the falling number of available housing units in the town. So a cap would potentially keep more homes, like the homes on like some homes, keep more homes from being sold to people who don't plan to live on them. So we can, hopefully maintain at least the number of families living in this town that we currently have. We need to build more homes. There's lots of approaches to the housing issue that we face, but one possible scenario would be to limit the continued sale of homes to people who don't plan to live here. That's the reason for the cap. The safety issues are valid, but that isn't the driving force behind a cap.
Well, I guess that's the first time I've heard anybody articulate the reason for the cap too, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate that we're trying to promote some viability of our year-round community. I guess I would argue, and I'm gonna use my own personal example, that after my mom died about 20 years ago, I inherited a property, so did my sister. So we inherited 2 properties together. If this rule had been in place, we would have been subject to whatever the category is that isn't your primary residence, and neither of us lived here at the time. But guess what? We were able to short-term rental those houses out, and I basically was able to keep our house on ice until I was able to, have an opportunity to move back to the island and live here full time. So why would I vote for something that could potentially box me out from doing that in the future, or for my children? Like, I'm sorry, I just can't wrap my mind around it. Even though I appreciate hard work has gone into being thoughtful about this and trying to promote solutions, I just don't think that this particular set of rules is the solution to try to provide more available year-round housing in our town.
Okay, Alan.
Hi, my name's Alan Kimberly. I live in Stonesville. I've lived next to a weekly rental for 8 years, and it is not something that is wonderful. It's basically speaking, our town designates a hotel as providing transient housing. And that's the same thing a weekly rental does. And so technically, they really should be zoned commercial to have that. But I realize this is a vacation area and, you know, we have rental areas. With so many weekly rentals all over the island, our schools have a lack of children. Population of everybody in the school has been going down and down. And it is true that, you know, so many people that get a job here, the librarian at the library right here in town couldn't get a place to live. You know, people get weekly rentals and, you know, I understand why they do it. You make an awful lot of money. But you can also make, you know, some good money renting it out by the year instead of, you know, by the week. And if more people did that, we wouldn't be in the problem we have now. Thank you.
I don't know whether I need to be called on or if I can just jump in. My name's Kate Chaplin. And, I have a question for the board. What research did you guys do to see the efficacy of capping short-term rentals and how that will actually result in more year-round housing?
I think Noel can speak to that.
Yep, hello, Noel Musson here. How is everybody? Yeah, so we use this as a tool that other communities have used as well. And it's actually a fairly new tool. So it takes more time for a lot of other communities. So if you're looking at, say, Bar Harbor, which just adopted their cap, over time, we have to try to do the research to see if that's what the effects of that cap are. So there's not a lot of like formal research that you can go to and say, here's the exact statistical data, how a cap is going to work. But it is a tool that more and more communities are starting to think about.
So Rockland is considering reversing its cap because they're seeing, you know, that it's not having the positive effect. And there has been a lot of research done in out west communities that also show that limiting short-term rentals, particularly in you know, communities that rely on tourism, has a negative impact, and that it really doesn't create workforce housing or year-round housing. And while I don't disagree that the neighborhoods are changing, there's also, you know, we live in a this is the reality of where we live, that it's in high demand. And houses that can't be rented and have to be sold because either the owners die or choose to move or something else happens to them, if they have to sell it to somebody who can't then rent the house, it's not going to get sold to a year-round person. It's going to get sold to somebody who doesn't need to rent the house. And then it sits empty. And I'm not sure if that's really what the town wants. Short-term tenants, you know, maybe your neighbors, it feels like it's a hotel, but those are the people who are going into our restaurants, who are going into our shops, who are contributing to FOA, who are supporting our libraries, who ultimately move here and retire. And, you know, they bring an incredible boost to our economy. And if we start limiting that, we're now making it even harder for our seasonal community, you know, businesses to make ends meet. And I don't see, you know, I know that people say, oh, short-term rentals are taking up all the year-round housing. I would disagree. It's not causation, it's correlation. The reason we have so many more short-term rentals is because we live in a beautiful place that people love to visit, and it's very expensive to live here. And most homeowners who either live here or who want to be here, you know, to have a secondary home, can't afford to not rent. And, you know, to answer, you know, I did a little bit of research just based on our inventory, which I think, you know, at the Knowles Company, sorry, for those who don't know, I work as a rental agent at the Knowles Company here in Northeast Harbor. And I estimated that 11% of the housing stock of the rentals that we have in the town of Mount Desert are are owned by people who reside in the town of Mount Desert and either own the house as an inherited second property or purchased it at some point with the intent to, then rent it out. Only a very small handful actually live in them during the winter months and then move out for the purpose of renting them. Only 1.8% are what I would consider investment-only rentals. And of those, 2 were inherited by the owners, and they have to rent them in order to keep them in the family. The third was used by a homeowner at one time, but he's no longer able to use it. So that's only 1.8%. And now, granted, a lot of rental homeowners probably wouldn't use an agency like ours. They probably are going to be going on VRBO and Airbnb. I get it. So let's make it a generous, 3 times, 4 times that number are investment rentals. I estimate that 9% of the houses that we represent were removed from year-round housing market within the past 10 years. That's only 9%. And mostly that was because the owners either passed away or they were sold by the second generation, or they were elderly owners who sold them out of necessity. So they were houses that were lived in and were removed because they had to be sold to people who could afford to pay a higher value for them. That's only 9%. 86% of our homeowners, the homes that we represent, were never designed or intended to be lived in year round. I think that that's a safe estimate for general housing stock. And last but not least, I'll just point this out. 56% are owned by family groups who inherited the home, not, purchased it and invested and still rent it. So it's not as if they bought it just for the express reason to rent it. I feel like, the picture that's painted of the rental scene is a little bit skewed by assuming that just because you're a secondary home homeowner who happens to rent your home, that you're an investment short-term rental using it as a hotel. I think that that's really not the case for our town.
So can I jump in or get to raise our hand?
Hold on just a second. Go ahead.
So Greg Dolphin, it's interesting. I just came from an Island House and Trust meeting. I've been on the board for some time, and we're creating 10 more affordable homes. And I just got a text from one of the board members, a realtor in Bar Harbor that is involved with the town, and she just made the comment to me that one, it had no correlation to affordable housing, what they've done in Bar Harbor, and this looks a lot like it's kind of copying Bar Harbor. In terms of affordable housing, it's still out of whack. So we have to do things like Island House and Trust and create with third-party intervention, affordable homes. And the administrative cost has been so challenging for me. They've got 300,000 or 400,000 additional salaries, just in the admin. The town is very frustrated in trying to manage this process, and it's done nothing to create more affordable housing stock for the town. So they're looking at other options. So it's just kind of the unintended consequences of trying to manage the caps and it sounds like from what I've heard, we are proposing a solution that we don't even know if we really have a problem. And I think we got to be mindful of what we're getting into if we go down this road like Bar Harbor in trying to manage this, because it didn't work for them. It didn't accomplish what they hoped it would do.
Can I piggyback off Greg? And he kind of addressed a little bit of one of my concerns in wondering, so I will fall into the category of short-term rental.
Could you identify?
Oh, yeah, I am Megan Savage, Sam's neighbor. And I will fall into the category of short-term rental. It's my primary residence. I will likely be renting my home out in the future. And while I'm okay to be paying, say, a nominal licensing fee, I do wonder what that money will go to. Will that money go to strictly enforcement and management of this sort of situation that we may create? Or is that money gonna go towards building affordable housing or fixing or, you know, problem solving? I have a hard time wrapping my head around paying for something that's just going to be, well, basically telling me what I can do at my home that I live at, right? Without actually providing a solution beyond that. So my question is, piggybacking is, what does that licensing fee go to? Do we know?
Yeah, well, the fee has been determined, is for administration and enforcement. Probably it's a fairly conservative fee, so there's liable to be an overage above and beyond what it actually costs to administer. I think at that point in time, we would have to take a look at what that fee is and then decide what, you know, could be done with that money along those lines that you're suggesting. Now, so that would be kind of where we go. It's designed, the fee was designed to administer and, but there may be very well an excess of that, and then that could go into those things.
Yeah, that would feel better as a
It
whole.
was not designed for that, but it could be incorporated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be good, even if to consider, say, a percentage that will commit to,
I think that's
Putting
an
this back.
excellent suggestion, and we have actually discussed that, to have some correlation between
right,
trying to alleviate the problem, but also do something positive with it. I think that's great. Thank you.
Go ahead, the back.
Randy Merchant.
Randy.
Carolyn, do you seriously think the fee's gonna generate more than $100,000?
Oh,
The
absolutely.
administration cost?
Absolutely, and the reason, I can't guarantee it, Randy, but the reason I did is when we started to look at a lot of these numbers, there's several software companies that, that they monitor ads and a number of other things to try to come up with a number that they think of rentals. And they all, interestingly enough, came in with very close numbers of over 400. But I wanted to be very, very conservative, especially setting this up. So I based those numbers on, say, around 250 to 260. So it could be very close to double of that number. That's not a guarantee, but I tend to be very conservative on revenue.
So we're thinking $500 per rental unit or something?
No, 250 if you're a short term, 500 if you're a vacation, and those definitions are in the ordinance. So, yeah, I mean, I would think that that number that we're considering for revenues would be on the low side.
Sam was next.
Could you speak a little bit more, because I read the draft ordinance, but it didn't speak to a fee structure or rationale behind whatever fees you're planning to charge, at least in this first year. Are there different types of users? It sounds like you've already considered that within the two classes, there might be a different fee structure. And then on the expense side, have you done an estimate for what not just the administrative costs, but what if there's legal opposition to this and there's litigation around it with respect to either enforcing the law, or if somebody decides to fight it? Have we the investigation or as to what that might cost the town, and how are the fees gonna cover that? And maybe you could just talk a little bit generally about the fee structure.
Well, fee structure is based on two different categories. One, short-term rentals, that is the owner occupied facility, that would be 250. The vacation rentals are ones that are investment properties, more or less. People are not living in those. Those would be 500. Now, to answer your question about that, no, we've not incorporated into that, Sam, the first year of what the legal possibilities would be, and there could be some, but I think what you do that first year is going to be kind of spent writing the rules in order to be able to enforce the language of the ordinance, which those are the two purposes. So we might very well, the second year might have to add one. couldn't guarantee that that would be the case.
So to get a little grainier, let's say I have a property and I have my primary residence on the property. And then I build an accessory dwelling unit as is allowed per the town ordinance in certain zones. And that accessory dwelling unit, I decide to rent out on a short-term basis. Which bucket does it fall in?
That would be a short-term rental.
Which means that's my owner occupied or?
It's, yeah, it's not theoretic, it's not actually owner occupied. It's the property on which that rental exists is occupied more than X number of days in order to make you a resident of the town of Mount Desert. So even if you rented your primary residence as well as an attached garage apartment, if you call that your home legally, those are all short-term rentals.
So is it 250 plus 250 if I decide
That's
to rent?
what you-
That's what it would be.
You have to get a license for each
Yeah.
unit that you were renting out, but you would not fall under the vacation rental.
And now the short-term rental also encompasses those, and this is something that there's a couple of well, I don't want to misconception, but the summer rentals, the ones that aren't essentially available for year round, regardless of what people wanted to do, would fall under the short-term rental, even if it wasn't a primary residence, as far as the fee structure and then calling a
And the
home.
restrictions.
Yeah, the
No
restrictions,
cap.
right. And then the other thing that I want to clarify, based on somewhat what Kate Chaplin said, was that some of these homes, as we've noted, are inherited summer homes. And folks, either can or can't afford. We listened to a lot of feedback and tried to make sure that we acknowledged those things. Some of these homes were not bought in order to rent. Some of these homes are owned because they're a family heritage home and they need to be able to pay the taxes and whatnot. And those are not investment properties, but they would fall under the vacation rental because nobody calls that their residence and is a town of Mount Desert resident. That's
If
the
it's a-
clarification.
If it's a house that could not be, the whole purpose of this is to preserve as far as we can year-round housing, which we're in dire need of, as you know. But if there's a home that hasn't got it, I don't want to say indoor plumbing, that's not what I mean. It doesn't have,
It's not winterized.
we're not winterized, thank you. Then it's not gonna be part of the housing stock for year-round occupancy, so that's not gonna be capped either.
So
Yeah.
is that part of the enforcement around that? Like, what does that enforcement look like? And how do you plan to do that? Like, are you going through each home and saying, you're winterized, you're not? Oh, I see that you've got a car there that's not your own. I'm gonna come inspect you. Like, what does that enforcement look like?
I think that, as I assume, the deputy code enforcement officer, which is a new position, a changed position from part-time to full-time, who would be overseeing this whole ordinance implementation. They're not gonna have time or inclination to go around and inspect each one of these properties. When people apply for their license, they'll be asked, is it year-round, is it seasonal, is it this, is it that? And as in any licensing agreement, you kind of assume people are gonna tell you the truth. If there's a complaint, if the neighbors are having rowdy parties and there's garbage all over and too many cars, and somebody makes a complaint to the town, then the deputy code enforcement officer would have to go in and take a look. And to see if the renter was in violation of the ordinance, the safety ordinance or the cleanliness or what, too many people in the house. But otherwise, we're not gonna go poking into everybody's house. That doesn't make sense. Just the way we don't now unless someone reports something.
Mhm.
So can I get,
I think I saw Craig Roebuck's hand up.
okay.
I did, thanks. I just wanted to piggyback on what Kate Chaplin said earlier. I'm glad that she has that experience with Knowles. I just wanted to pass on my experience when I worked for the US Census. And I had to go around and I saw what a huge problem housing is in this town. It may be here now, it may be here in the future. It's definitely a problem we have to work with. I don't have hard numbers because that data, of course, went to the Census Bureau. But I had to contact the owners of all the rental properties that I came across. There was a lot of them. And by far, those owners were out of state, way more than the single digit percentages that Kate mentioned. I would guess 40 to 60% conservatively was what I saw. Now, granted, some of those might be inherited properties from sons and daughters that have to live out of state and rent their place. But I just want to piggyback that, that 8-9% was not my experience when I ran around the town knocking on doors.
I should clarify then what I was referring to. I'm not talking about 8 or 9% of people who don't live in the state where they own the house. I'm talking about that there are only a very few people who actually, and just because I know the individuals and know the purposes, very few who actually bought the house strictly for the purpose of investing. I would say a large majority of the homeowners that we represent live out of state and rent and own their houses because they want a vacation home in Mount Desert Island. And they rent them out in order to sustain that. Obviously, most of our population live out of state and own houses here in the town and enjoy them for 2-3 weeks out of the year, sometimes only 1 week. And the rest of the time, they need to rent it in order to pay for the carrying costs. But I want to ask a question of clarity because I'm having a hard time understanding this difference. It seems to me like you're classifying 3 different types of houses. I understand that short-term rentals, and what you're saying is owner occupied means that the owner lives in them year round and then moves out or has an adjacent little camp or something like that that they move into, or they rent out the small garage apartment, but that for the majority of the year, the owner is living in the house. Is that what you're calling short-term rental?
Short-term rental is the primary residence.
Right. Okay. So the primary, but they don't have to be living in the primary residence when they rent it. They could be in a camp or somewhere else. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And that Kate, is it continuing a tradition. It's been a long tradition in our town, as you know. People don't like to be here in August. They go to their camp and rent their house out.
No, totally get it. And that's fine. I just want to make sure because some people hear owner occupied and they think, oh, that means I had, like in New York, I have to be living in it when my Airbnb guest is there, but that's not what you're talking about. You're just saying that majority of the time they're there. The second differentiation that you made was a seasonal rental, which is generally it's on a seasonal well. It doesn't have insulation. It's, just a little camp on the water. I get that. How would you classify, and it's owned by somebody who doesn't live in it year round, or, it was never intended to be a year round house. How would you classify some of our larger summer estates that were never built to be lived in year round, certainly not affordable by the average resident on Mount Desert Island, but are insulated, have central heating, central AC, some are on year round wells and water and technically could be lived in year round. Does that be, even though it was never intended to be year round, where do they fall? Because it's not as if they're adding to the housing stock by being,
Well, I guess
they're not short-term rentals.
that discussion did come up, but that would not be, if there was nobody called that their primary residence, it would fall under the vacation rental, and the extra $250 would hopefully not be too much of a burden on the owner of that home.
I'm not considering the burden. I'm worried about the stock, about the cap, because then suddenly they're subject to the cap, whereas the little camp right next to them isn't.
And I want to clarify something, Kate, that I think may help here. Anybody who currently is renting a short-term rental will be able to
Vacation.
continue, or vacation rental or whatever, can continue to do that if this ordinance passes, as long as they license the rental and continue to renew the license.
How
Yeah,
is
but-
there already 10%?
That, through attrition.
Hey, there's a lot of questions in the chat. Can you guys address those over, please?
No,
No, we can't.
no.
Well, we can read them to you if you'd like.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
My name is Doug Sperling. You've received probably a handful of emails from me. I do not live on the island. I live in Kennebunkport and drove 3 hours tonight to be here. And we do short-term rentals as our family income. We do it all over the country. My wife and 4 kids, all under the age of 6. We buy markets that we've vacationed in, like, and want to visit, and then rent it when we're not there. So we do short-term rentals full-time. I have many points that I emailed the board that I won't take up too much time going through, but I think my quick points would be, there's nobody disagreeing with life safety, so let's get that off the table, and the life safety stuff is a no-brainer. Kennebunkport, the town that I live in, but do not own a rental property in, the code enforcement officer recently resigned because this ordinance went into place. One of the reasons he resigned is this ordinance went into place, and he was completely overwhelmed with the amount of administrative stuff. 250 times an average of $400 is about $60,000 to $80,000 in income that this ordinance would, this license would generate. I would strongly push back that that's not going to cover your administrative costs, and that's not going to cover that's not going to cover one person's salary, in addition to any legal recourse that may come. We should really not look in Maine, in my opinion, as an example of short-term rentals, because like everything, it starts out west, and they've been doing this a lot longer from a formal perspective. If you look at places like Austin, Texas, they went to the Supreme Court and were taken to the Supreme Court because it was determined that whether we agree or not, renting your property is a residential activity. It's been proven by the Supreme Court. It is not a business activity. We just have a shorter term lease. We happen to work off of a 7-day lease or a 4-day lease or a 10-day lease, not a 365-day lease. But we have rental agreements. We have the same rights as landlords, just because we choose to rent it for a shorter duration. States like North Carolina, you can look outside of Maine for examples. I know locally, Kennebunkport, I can speak more to than Bar Harbor, but I've also heard Bar Harbor is having an absolute nightmare with enforcement. So just something to be concerned in regards to the cap. I know that was already discussed. I would just throw out, and I put this on my email, Zillow has an average in this town, an average house of $857,000. Maine's affordable housing is about 20 to 30% of your household income. If you look at affordable, Maine average income is $60,000. That means they would have to have a mortgage of around $1,600 a month. There's no house that is a short-term rental that is, when sold to somebody to retain as affordable housing, is going to have a mortgage of $1,600. That's like a $300,000 house. There's not a lot of them that exist. So my point is, to somebody's point that's probably been made a couple times, the homes that are short-term rentals are not the same homes that are affordable housing. They're just like in real estate with asset classes. They're 2 different asset classes. You're comparing apples to oranges. So the affordable housing, the license cap has already been beaten. I think the enforcement of that is going to be, Kennebunkport has essentially found it impossible and has essentially thrown their hands in the air to Rockland and is reversing it. As a non-voter, but a property taxpayer, I feel very strongly about being treated differently just because this is not my primary residence. I pay the same amount of tax per rate as everybody else, and I don't put straps on any of the systems like the schools or anything like that. My kids go to Kennebunkport schools. So why should I have a different treatment because I'm not a taxpayer, a taxpayer, but not a voter and not a primary residence? I think treating somebody differently because they are not able to live on the island is unfair. So that would be my third point. occupancy limits. There's an occupancy limit that's currently proposed, that's 2 per bedroom plus 2. In my email, I use the example of kids. My wife and I often travel with our best friends who have 3 kids. We have 4 kids. So 2 and 2 is 4, plus 7 kids is 11. For cost, we could very easily sleep in a 3-bedroom house, maybe a 4-bedroom house with no issues. Our kids are all under the age of 6. That puts no stress, there's no negativity to that, but in this ordinance, that would not be allowed in that house. So, for context, I operate short-term rentals myself. I don't hire property managers myself all over the country. When you are on septic, you have code requirements based upon the capacity of that septic. So my suggestion would be to base it off of the septic, not just an arbitrary two plus 2 bedroom thing. That makes no sense because you don't know what people have for bedroom sizes. Is it a bunk bed? Is it kids in the house? Is it not kids in the house? I would consider something off of the septic versus just a generic 2 plus 2. And then my final point, I'll move on, is really the core of this. I've listened to all the Zoom meetings on this, and there was somebody that brought up the problem that we're trying to solve. What is the core problem? And it still remains unclear what problem we're actually trying to solve. Because I think it's very clear, hopefully by now you've heard enough, that this is not going to impact affordable housing. 0. It won't. And so by putting caps in place, I'm to be clear, I'm all for a license and paying a fee for life safety and inspections and fire and all that fun stuff, all for it. But as soon as you tell me that we can't rent, or we have to meet a cap, or we have to only hit an occupancy limit, I just think you want to go big picture into constitutional rights and all that stuff. I do think you're going to open up a big can of worms that you've seen at a national level, not just a local island issue. So those are my 4 points.
Great, thank you.
Looking to make a comment? David Short. David Short.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so believe I've heard a couple of different things. And
Identify yourself, please.
David
Short. David Short. So we're over in Pretty Marsh with our neighbors, and I believe I've heard a couple of different things because at one point, so the residences, our residents and the neighbors are not winterized. They're completely not winterized, but they are not our primary residences. At certain points during this meeting, I've heard it said that those would actually qualify as a short-term rental and not be subject to the cap. But that's not the way the ordinance reads. So I think we need a little clarification on that. These again are they're owner occupied for most of the summer, and then they're rented out for anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 weeks to pay the taxes and some of the expenses. My main problem here is one is the cap. But if though our type of residence is actually a short-term rental, then most of my concerns go away. And I do also have a concern that if we're in fact a seasonal rental, I don't think that the difference in the fee is fair, because it sounds like the justification for doubling the fee is that someone wants to they buys a property and they want to do it as a commercial enterprise. And I can understand increasing the fee because of that. But again, in our neighborhood, most of these short-term rentals are done just to pay what everyone has identified as the very high cost of maintaining a property on Mount Desert Island. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess, so in the ordinance, there's a definition of what a seasonal vacation rental is. And I'd be curious, because we do want to get this definition right. What is it about the definition that doesn't apply to something like what you're talking about? So the model that we used was so we're trying to find some things that, at least for enforcement purposes, can be consistent with other things. So we're using like a MUBEC which is a building code in the state of Maine definition. Is it too specific? Is it, or do you have something that you're calling seasonal but could be year round?
No, I actually think that the ordinance is fairly clear, but I have verbally heard different things during the meeting.
So to be clear.
I've heard
there are
board
three-
members say that type of a residence would actually be short-term rental. At least that's what I heard. I don't know if that's what they said. So that's what I'm looking for clarification of.
So there are three different classifications in the ordinance. One of them is called a short-term rental, and that's based on whether or not that's your primary residence for tax purposes. Then there's something called a seasonal vacation rental, which is essentially what I think you're talking about,
Okay.
which is it's not a year-round structure. And then there's something called a vacation rental, and that's basically a year-round structure that is not your primary residence for tax purposes, just to try to simplify. The seasonal vacation rental and the short-term rental are treated exactly the same in the ordinance.
And not
So
something.
you have to get a license, but there's no cap. The only cap applies in this draft applies to the vacation rentals. So if you're a seasonal structure, you're a camp on a lake, then you're treated like a short-term rental. So get a license and carry on doing what you're doing. That's the way
Okay,
this is.
so what I described as non-winterized residences would be treated the same as a short-term rental, even though it's not a primary residence.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, I suggest a clarification of that in the ordinance. Because that makes a really big difference. I mean, that addresses some of the problems that I have with this.
Yeah, I think we can definitely.
We don't necessarily, my brothers and I don't rent out, our neighbors do. You know, as I think it was Kate identified before, 20 years from now, when I'm gone, you know, my kids may have to rent out, because if the taxes keep going up the way they've been going up, yeah, they're gonna have to rent out to hold on to the place.
Okay,
So
thanks, David.
that's the clarification.
Kathy, go ahead.
Kathy Miller, live in Somerset, and have for 30+ years. And I just want to come out and say, I support having a short-term rental ordinance. I think we do need a cap on this. And I'm also a part of the town's economic development committee, and we've been supporting this. But for years now, that town committee has looked at what's going on in the economy, how can we improve this, looking at the town comprehensive plan, which is always to bring back a more robust year-round population, have housing that's affordable. Over the last 20 years, as technology has entered all of our lives, we have seen the impact on our downtown businesses. You know, retail shops are competing against somebody walking in and saying, oh, I can get this online for the same amount, I'll just order it instead of buying it in the shop. The same thing has happened with housing. We have had a tradition on this island of people renting out their houses. I've had lots of family members stay in a rented house. Beautiful houses, short-term rentals, love it. But the balance isn't there. And so anybody who's trying to rent can't find a place to rent. And I've had family members who have been in a rental year-round that was sold, and now they have to leave that rental because it's going over to short-term rental. So did their neighbor, so did somebody else. I know at least 3 people who have lost their year-round apartment or house because it has turned over to short-term rental. When my husband and I need to find a new place to live, we can't find anything. We've been here for a long time. Look on Bar Harbor, Barter and Swap and MBI Housing Rental. It's impossible to find a place to live here. And the impact on all of our businesses is terrible. On our schools, it's terrible. The school population keeps dropping down, but the expenses aren't coming down because we still need to have all of that stuff. We need more people living in the town. We've lost our ambulance service, and now the fire department had to take over the ambulance service because we don't have enough volunteers for that, because you need a more robust housing community, people living here year round. So I understand that the impact individually on who want to rent out, but you have to understand the impact on people who want to live here and can't find a place they afford. You're saying right now, changing this and putting a cap on it isn't going to help the affordable housing issue? Well, that's because it's been going on for a long time and the prices just keep going up. Between COVID and the income you can make on short-term or vacation rentals, that's why prices are going up. And because people can't afford to live here, service people have to come from farther away, it makes it harder and harder and more expensive to build anything. So I just think we need to find a balance because we do need to have a year-round community here. Nobody's the good guy or the bad guy, but we need to find a balance. And I think that this kind of ordinance and a cap is the way to go.
Thanks, Kathy.
Kate Chaplin, I agree with you, Kathy. I see all the.
Hold on, please.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For Millbrook Road. I'm backtracking back to this, the difference between the short-term rent, right? Being like a camp where someone, doesn't have any, the plumbing is not available in winter because it's not heated.
Yeah.
So what would stop an individual from buying a place, draining all the pipes in the winter, and then calling it, that camp? And now it becomes on the short-term rental vacation program, right? I mean, there's plenty of houses around here. I walk down the street here and God, half of them, maybe more, are ghost houses. The plumbing's been drained. I mean, they can be short-term rentals. And now they're not fall under, they don't fall under vacation rental, right? And as far as the individual over here in the back about the affordability and the caps and all that, I'm in disagreement with that. I think the town needs to build more affordable housing. That's what really needs to be done. You're not gonna fix the affordable housing with this short-term rental law that you're proposing. It's gonna work. I just don't see it. And I'm sure it's not working in Bar Harbor. And you have houses here that cost a lot of money. And just because, some individual rented the house and now the house got sold by a family member, let's say, for X, Y, Z, the new people could not afford anyway to rent that house out for $1,500 a month. It ain't gonna happen. Not if they're paying $800,000 for the house. Have you seen the mortgage rates? They're 8% right now, 8%. The taxes, the mortgage, the insurance. By the time the homeowner's done after they purchase the property, that house will need to be rented out probably for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month, just so they can cover their expenses. Just to cover the mortgage, let's say the guy put down 20%, bought a house for $800,000, put down, let's say, 160, 200,000, whatever. Now he's got a $600,000 mortgage. Anyone of you right now can go on bankrate.com, put in the amount with the mortgage rate, what it is right now, let's say 8%, even 7%, 6.75%. There's plenty of realtors in this room that can give us the numbers more exactly. But at the end of the day, if you add up all the mortgage with the interest that they have to pay, the taxes to the town, the water bill, which is, $600, $700 a year here, it's fixed. Free. Well, no, you have to fix water bill, you gotta pay. It's not free. Everybody gets a water bill, right?
No,
We don't get water.
you don't get a water bill. No water bill.
I mean, I get a bill every, am I the only one getting a bill? Pardon me?
Yes, you are.
Per month, got it.
All the stuff included, there's no way that house is gonna get rented for $1,600 a month, ain't happening. Because the owner is gonna be coming out of pocket every month. He's gonna be taking $3,000 a month out of his pocket to subsidize the tenant paying $1,600 a month, ain't gonna work. I mean, maybe if the guy has a good heart, maybe it's a charity case, I don't know. But in any case, the town needs to really think about more affordable housing, build the housing. I know there was the one project over here, I forget the name of it, I've been following it. There's been a lot of opposition against it, it was crazy. I was all for it. I don't know why anybody would be against affordable housing, I couldn't figure that one out. Whatever, that's just.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
I agree with you. This is not gonna fix the problem. We do need more affordable housing, and I too support the project that is gonna go and gonna happen.
Hopefully, right? Hopefully there's more.
But I will say,
And there's
this
plenty of land
is,
available
this,
for affordable
this
housing.
proposed ordinance is one piece of a very complicated puzzle, but But, we're putting it forward, we're hoping to put it forward to the voters to see what they think, but there have been some very good comments tonight, and we can still incorporate some of the ideas that came up tonight into the ordinance and continue with it.
Okay. Take some comments at this time.
Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. Laura Smolich, and I'm from Hall Quarry. I'm here to represent the Bill of Rights, quite frankly. We're overstepping, quite a bit. Maybe not so much on a fee, but I might state that it should be a flat fee, not with any increase for a short term or a vacation, just a flat fee. And that is all, folks. Because you start getting into how many people are staying in a house, what are people using the house for? I mean, I'm a perfect example. I have a seasonal house and I have a garage apartment. Thank goodness I have a garage apartment because I came home from being away in the Navy and I am living in my garage apartment and enjoying the seasonal house in the seasonal months. I have in fact rented it on one occasion to workforce housing because an individual didn't have a place to go. Okay, simple as that. I can see that a lot of discussion here is about a two-headed terrible thing, workforce housing and the amount of rentals affecting workforce housing. Well, I can honestly tell you that when I was a young woman, a young child, that we moved 9 times in the state of Maine because my father was an educator. And what happens? You have to be out in May and back in again, maybe at the end of September. If you're teaching, educating. And that's a tough road to haul. It really is. And I'm just saying that that was being done in the 1960s and late 50s. And we're still having this discussion today. So there's something, unfortunately, about our area that makes it very difficult to get that workforce housing a place to live. Ask the Jackson Lab. I came home trying to get a job at the Jackson Lab. I got a job. 3 days later, I gave it up. Had to. Couldn't find a house with a year-round situation. There wasn't over an hour and a half, or an hour for sure, away that would handle the square footage I needed in a year-round scenario. So what was I gonna be looking at? Same thing I did was as a kid with my parents. And that was get something seasonal, pay whatever for the winter months and pay the other in summer months, or move further away in the summer months. So it's age long. I understand you folks have the good intentions, but I think you're diving in to an area that is, first of all, and I know Mr. Vincent is here, unconstitutional. It's very much verging on a violation of, I believe it's the 10th Amendment about government, basically is not for the people. It's actually going kind of taking over and telling the people what we're gonna do. And I think that is highly unconstitutional. And I have a feeling it probably will hit home if this proposed ordinance goes anywhere near beyond the town meeting or beyond this meeting tonight. Because I hope you table it.
Can I just clarify something?
Yes, certainly.
You're the people that vote on it. We don't vote it into,
I
right? Okay, well,
Some
there's
can,
a reason for that,
some
but
can.
yeah.
But I agree with you. I mean, yes, this is a situation. I understand what you're saying, but I think when you look at this over the history, workforce housing has always been an issue. And we have a lot of need for it, especially in the summertime, because we have the people that come work in the summer. Some of them work for these rentals, some are cleaning them. Some people vagabond, they come up here in the summer, go to Florida or the southern states. It works for them, but they've got to have some place to live too. So, it's a historical thing, folks, and I just want you to understand that we need to remember about the Bill of Rights as well, because this is getting in the way. very touchy area. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Jennifer Feltwell, you had your hand.
Hey,
Wow.
yes. Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to understand, because I have not been to a selectmen's meeting before. I admit I'm from the island originally, but my husband and I have been in the military this past 27 years. And so we own a home in Otter Creek. That's where I'm from. And we hope to retire there. And so we rent out the house to help make it affordable. And I'd like to eventually be able to let our kids inherit it and also rent it out so they can afford to keep it, which is the situation for me, my sisters, a lot of our family. This is how we, stay connected and eventually move back to the island, is being able to, work away when we need to, and then rent it to pay it off. So I would like to know, is the vote going to be tonight? Is that correct? No. Okay. So I think, one of the things to question is, if this is our primary residence, like this is the only home we own and we're military, is that considered our primary residence? And if we move out to rent it out, would we have to get a permit?
So that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. If the property is your primary residence for tax purposes, then it would be considered a short-term rental. If you moved out and started renting it and then moved somewhere else for tax purposes, then
No, I'm just saying I don't own a house anywhere else. I don't pay taxes on a house anywhere else. I'm in the military. I rent an apartment somewhere else and I come up to the house whenever I can, whenever I have leave, but we do short-term rentals to help it be affordable.
Yeah, I think it would be a vacation rental. I don't know, Martha, it sounds like you have a different opinion.
Well,
But if she's saying,
That's on where her legal residence.
Yeah, it really,
yeah, is it your legal residence?
Yeah.
I know military people have different options as far as maintaining, because they have to move. They have different options as far as where they vote. If they vote absentee, they can keep their cards registered. So if they're a legal resident,
Yep.
then it's not a vacation rental, it's a short-term rental.
So it'd be a short-term rental.
Yeah,
So it'd still be a limit.
No,
So short-term rentals, there's no permit. Is that right?
You'd have to get a permit, but there would be no cap.
No what?
No cap on the number of rentals like that.
no idea about that.
Okay.
So that was,
And also, what about my children? So eventually they would be able to rent it as well? Or what if all the permits were taken and never could get a permit?
So in the scenario, well, trying to scenario plan here a little bit, but if that is their primary residence, then there's no cap on that and they could continue doing it. If you are for some reason considered a vacation rental, there is a process in the ordinance which allows you to transfer that license to your kids.
even if the cap was exceeded,
Even if
you would
the
be
cap-
grandfathered.
Yep.
Okay.
So
But
there's a
then
provision-
at the end of that year, they'd be considered a new vacation rental, right?
No,
No.
as long as they renew it, they're considered a vacation rental. If you miss
Okay.
the registration period, then you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah,
If
that
they-
gotcha with the annual rental is kind of tough. So the other question is, have you guys considered changing the requirements for the additional dwelling units to increase housing? Because that's one of the biggest hindrances to building new housing in the island is all the requirements. Like I cannot build another house on my property or another additional dwelling unit with a kitchen because of the zoning laws. So have you considered changing the zoning laws to increase the number of additional dwelling units? Those would also be more affordable units, most likely. And the folks who have said that most people cannot afford the housing, that's very true.
If density questions are really important, we are already working on that. In fact, this year at the town meeting, there's a few provisions that are gonna be before the town that would allow for every lot to have an accessory dwelling unit on it, unless it's in the shoreland zone. are things that we cannot control as a town. So those rules are given to the town by the state. So those are the rules that we can't mess around with. We can start to look at density, which we will do. I would encourage everyone who's really interested to really start paying attention when we get into working on the comprehensive plan, because that's gonna set the tone for land use moving forward. Next year, we're gonna be looking at areas, we're gonna be looking at locations throughout town where we might start to think about, hey, maybe we should do a maximum lot size instead of a minimum lot size, which would then help start to keep maintaining neighborhoods the way that they need to be. And people wouldn't be able to go and necessarily buy up all these lots and just put one house in an area where there used to be 3, for example. So we're doing
So
all
quick
of
question.
those.
Thanks for answering. Two last questions. So when will the vote be, please?
Town meeting.
Town meeting.
No, what date? Sorry.
May 7th.
May 7th. Okay, great. Thank you. And then last question. Oh, I forgot it.
Okay.
Sorry.
I forget which one. All right. Thank you. That's
Thanks,
it.
Jennifer. Joyce Morrissey, you've been waiting for ages. Go ahead.
Midland's been on that before.
Well, I can't see who, yeah, he came in after Joyce. Joyce, go ahead.
Thank you. I think my question may have been answered but just now, but I'd like confirmation. We have a seasonal rental. We just rent spring through fall. What does that look like at the time of resale? Are we grandfathered in? Can we just transfer our permit over to the buyer if we were to sell?
Well, the question would be whether you live there in the time you're not renting it. I mean, if the short-term rental, then there's no cap on that. The new person could, by the way, we tried to write this if the house sold during the calendar year, the permit would transfer to the buyer. And at the beginning of the next year, the buyer would get a new permit. And if it's in the short-term rental category, there would be no cap, so there'd be no issue.
Right, there's no cap, but how about the wait?
No, there's no, they would be able to continue doing that.
They're next in line for the next
Let
season.
can I just run through a scenario, so maybe that'll answer your question. So if the way that this ordinance is written, if your property is not your primary residence, it would be considered a vacation rental. There is a cap on vacation rentals. If you sell your vacations and the first time around, so this ordinance would not be effective until 2025, I think.
Yeah.
And if there's more vacation rentals than there are numbered in the cap the first time around, you can still apply and get it. So if there's, the cap is 260 units for vacation rentals, and there were 400 vacation rentals. If 400 vacation rentals apply in the first year, then the select board issues 450 licenses. And your license carries forward as long as you continue to register. And if you don't register and you miss a deadline, then you lose that license. You could potentially lose that license if you're a vacation rental. There is a transferability clause in the ordinance, which allows a vacation rental property owner, I should say, to transfer that property if you sell it to if you ended up selling it to your kids, if you put it in a trust, if you change the sort of the legal framework of your ownership, there is a transferability clause in that ordinance that allows you to do it. If you sell it to somebody who doesn't fit within that definition, then they can't transfer that license. That's the way the ordinance is written for vacation rentals only.
They can use it that year.
Yes,
the license goes with it for that year, but for the following year, they have to apply for a new.
But I think she was talking about short-term rental.
If you're a short-term rental, which is your primary residence, there's no cap.
Or a seasonal.
Or a season, yes. So it's just get a license and renew your license every year. If you sell it, the person who bought it comes in, gets an updated license for that property.
But only if they're using it also as a primary residence.
Correct.
And that they don't get, that unit doesn't go from being an owner occupied short-term rental to actually a non-owner occupied vacation.
That's right.
All right. Todd Midland, go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much. This question is on totally different subject, which is parking. Presuming that this ordinance is going to advance in some form, we're very concerned about the parking restrictions that are included here. It says the owner must provide sufficient off-street parking for all overnight guest vehicles, and that garage parking spaces are not allowed for short-term rental or vacation rental guests. So the issue for us, and I'm sure many other people, is, for instance, we have one potential vacation rental that has no off-street parking. It only has garage parking. We have another potential vacation rental that has 2 parking spaces, but many more on-site parking spaces, but per the ordinance could be rented to many more people. So I think there needs to be clarification for people who have limited off-site parking, either or in one of our cases, no non-garage off-site, on-site parking. You know, it just seems too restrictive relative to what an owner what we could do as owners now, or what, you know, anyone else with a longer driveway or etc. You know, lots of waterside parcels. One of our parcels is not on waterside, but is on Lower Dunbar and has a very short driveway. You know, and again, has more bedrooms than it would have on-site parking unless you allowed the garage. So I would respectfully request that this issue be revisited to allow maximum flexibility for on-site parking instead of restricting on-site parking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd, for pointing that out. I would like to just clarify that the intent of the ordinance is to actually just be
Couldn't hear you.
I think we lost them.
Oh, did they have like weather?
We're
not hearing.
We can't hear Noel. Oh,
Yeah.
we lost the room.
Yeah, we lost the
Hey,
room.
Does anybody know, are we gonna be able to vote if we don't live there? Like, you know?
No, only residents of the town of Mount Desert can vote.
Well, I'm a resident, but I'm in the military, right? So
Yeah,
I vote over there.
you have to be physically present.
You have to be physically present due to state moderator law.
Jen, I think we're flying up for May 7th.
I guess so.
Todd, I think you're misreading that ordinance, that provision in the ordinance. What it says is that you can't, if you don't allow your short-term renters to use your garage, you can't count that parking space towards providing sufficient parking. So you can't say, oh yeah, I've got room for 3 cars, 1 in the driveway and 2 in the garage, and then deny your short-term tenants use of the garage. You guys give use of the garage, it sounds like. So it would, that you can use the garage to count the number of spaces off street that are provided. But you raised a good point, because there are some neighborhoods that have on-street parking that's totally permissible in Seal Harbor, I'm assuming, right? You can park on the road on Upper Dunbar.
The way this reads, it says garage parking spaces not allowed for short-term rental or vacation rental guests use shall not be used to meet this parking requirement.
So that means
Yeah,
if you have a garage, but you don't, allow them to use it, then you can't use the garage to count towards providing sufficient spaces.
But that doesn't seem to be
Right.
what it's saying. It's saying.
It would be best if everybody put this in the chat so that the town can read it.
Yeah, all
They
right.
may not be able to hear you.
Well, the
And
good thing is we're not voting, so if they're not voting tonight, we can all submit. You know, last meeting, we couldn't say anything.
right,
Yeah.
but you should submit it on chat because they may not be able to hear what you're saying right now.
Oh.
If I could, if I may, my name's Tim Ford. Kate, you know who I am. I'm curious to ask a question. I joined late. I apologize, but the fellow from Kennebunkport was quite. I thought he kind of captured a lot of the key points. But the problem we're trying to solve here, I think, is affordable housing. Is that kind of the essence of what the town is trying to work for? And I think as a seasonal occupant, we'd all agree that we'd love to have more year-round residents in town, right? I mean, I hate the fact that the town is dependent on
everybody talking
as you know, for financial support. So we'd all like that, but the real question is how can we collectively come together and help?
So you can hear the conversation that's going on now. Okay.
Support year-round residents rather than trying to go at it this way, come at it some other way. And I think that's maybe the Kate, you might be the best person here.
Can I break in for a minute?
Help us organize some kind of a conversation.
Can I break in for a minute?
Sure.
The town can hear what you're saying.
But we can't hear them or see them.
Because somebody pulled the plug and they're working on getting it hooked back up again, but they can hear what we're saying. So it's being recorded, just so you know.
That's fine. I put in the chat, one of the things, the caps on primary, like the definition of primary residence and whether there's caps and that fact that that's a short-term rental. I don't feel like that's clear when I read the ordinance, but maybe it's just me. Maybe I read it too fast.
Oh, she's right.
I would still suggest that you write stuff in the chat so that they can keep a record. Okay, good, because then they can keep a record of what you're saying.
But is that clear to everybody else, but not me? I just feel like that's not very clear. The fact that my primary residence, if I decide to rent it out, there's no cap on that, and it's called a short-term rental.
I agree that it's confusing, and it's confusing for, you know, which are capped, which are allowed to be passed on to your children, which are allowed to be passed on to someone you sell it to. The most restrictive seems to be the vacation rentals, which are not primary residents and rented out short term. I also find it interesting that in this ordinance, there's no provision for the number of days property can be rented, you know, a limited number. I think that would be something they would want to add if they're trying to preserve the flavor of neighborhoods, to try to mitigate the 2-night, 3-night, 4-night stays.
We had that discussion when we were talking about this before on the Luso thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that a lot of people come here for weddings. And they're only here for 2 or 3 days, and they need somewhere to stay when they do that. And it's a huge business.
Yeah.
So that, anyways, that's why it's not in there.
There's less wear and tear, because I actually prefer the 2 to 3 day rentals for our house when we're not there, because we try to stay there as much as we can. But in between, we rent it. And I find there's a lot less wear and tear with the 2 to 3 day rentals. So
in a sense, I feel like what this is doing is driving a wedge between the year-round residents and the summer vacation rental property owners. And I think we ought to figure out how we can work collectively together. I mean, look, affordable housing is an issue on Mount Desert Island. It absolutely is. And I think we'd all agree with that. We'd all like to see more full-time residents on the island. But what we don't want to do is create a wedge between those who live there year round and those who have a home there. And so I don't know what we can do to figure out how to work through this, but I'd be happy to, in some way, shape, or form, participate in a conversation so that we can help solve the problem, not be perceived as the problem. And that to me is what I think is the issue here.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. And there are a lot of other programs that we could be working in. And I took a pretty shallow dive into what's happening out west in Vale and Aspen and other communities. And they have all kinds of incentive programs and nonprofits and really good ideas in creating subsidized housing, partially.
Vale's a great example.
Yeah. And, this is a nationwide problem. We're not the only community facing it. And we're a very small community by comparison. So it's probably feels like a bigger challenge to us. But it's definitely in the comments section, and there are a lot of comments, so it'll be hard to scroll through. But I put a link in there to the Milken Institute think tank out in California, nonpartisan, non-political.
Kate, can I break in there?
Yeah.
They just cut the link off for the whole thing because they can't get it hooked back up, and they're going to try and do their best.
Okay.
But apparently people are leaving the town office building because they're pissed off about it and they're waiting. And they may come back online in a couple of minutes and we can hook back up, but we'll have to restart all over again. I suggested that they reschedule.
Okay.
Whether they do or not, I don't know. Anyways, if they turned off the Zoom, it means they can't record what you're saying. So please write it down.
I
Yeah,
did.
that's
Kate,
But I do.
can
think
I
it's
just
very-
raise one question, Kate?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I came in quite late to the meeting, but this was the part of the meeting I wanted to hear. I understand and totally support the need for more affordable housing in Northeast Harbor, but many of the summer homes are not year round, including ours. And I don't see how restricting our rental things, first, I think if you're going to have a 28-day limit, you're living in the 1960s when people had full month vacations. They don't anymore, except incredibly wealthy people, which is going to limit the market. Kate, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, is going to limit the market for our homes. And the ability to rent a seasonal house doesn't affect the availability of housing for low income people because they can't live there all year long. Am
That's
I
right.
wrong?
They can't afford it.
Well, they can't afford it and they need
I
water
think
in the
they're-
winter.
I think they're back.
Checking my birth certificate, 71 years of count. So I've seen a lot of changes. And I get the changes constantly. But what we're dealing with now is a completely unregulated market. There is no system, no economic system, or really any system that works successfully if it's completely unregulated. But that's what we have right now. And we're reaping the results of that have been turbocharged in the past bunch of years. I want to point out that we have indeed suffered a loss of community. We struggle to put enough kids in our school. We struggle to find places for teachers, and not places for teachers and for people at the hospital and for people all over this island to work. We expect thousands of people every day to get on Route 3 and run the gauntlet to come onto this island to provide for us. We expect them to pay that, in essence, that sort of tax in order to be able to work here and to do the things that we want and need done. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, particularly in the summer, having to drive those huge distances. So that, and those people can't be in the room tonight. Those people won't be voting either. But those are the people we're missing. Those are the people who we need to, whose needs we need to respond to. Will this problem, did this law solve, this ordinance solve that problem? No. It's not just about one solution that's going to get us there. This is a problem that's happening not just off the coast of Maine, but it's happening worldwide. And communities are attempting to respond to it as best they can. If you want a solution to this problem, then you go ahead to Washington and you fix the tax code and the financial laws in this country so that we don't have such sweeping and growing disparity of income. But that's outside our jurisdiction. So we have to try to do what we can. This town is working, and entities in this town are working on affordable housing. And we run into opposition to that.
So everybody's gonna be opposed to something because everybody seems to me, as I listen to this tonight, is looking out for number one. That's not how we have, I mean, it's important, we need to hear those concerns. We need to hear those concerns, but in the end, when we make decisions, we have to make decisions that for what's in the best interest, what we believe to be in the best interest of the community. And I've heard a lot of objections, a lot of claims about quote unquote the Supreme Court and so forth. I want to point out to you that the Maine Municipal Association has issued a legal advisory about short-term rental regulations. The Affordable Housing Law especially confirms municipal home rule regulates short-term rentals, 38 IRS section 4360 through C2. The law identifies the regulation of short-term rentals as one way for a municipality to achieve statewide or regional housing production goals. Also, regulations that restrict short-term rentals in the municipality will likely be consistent with the purpose of the law, which is to support and encourage the creation of affordable housing. Municipalities may regulate short-term rentals in a number of ways. For example, a municipality may define and regulate short-term rentals as commercial uses or transient housing in local land use ordinances, rather than as residential housing, restrict where these uses may be located, or impose more stringent dimensional requirements on those uses. A municipality could also impose regulations limiting the number of short-term rentals in the municipality, such as through a licensed ordinance. So I would not be deterred by people going on about lawsuits and how that's going to be an issue. Anybody can sue about anything they want, but that does not mean we don't try to do the right thing and try to make a positive difference. This is only one piece of the puzzle. It's not a total solution. But the affordability problem in this area has changed dramatically over the past 10 or 20 years. Whole neighborhoods here go dark. Whole neighborhoods that used to have year-round housing, used to be affordable. Whole neighborhoods are dark. It's not just for short-term rentals. It's for people buying them for seasonal properties. There's no question about that. So it's a multifaceted problem, but nothing works well, including communities, if it's not in balance. And what we need to try to find here is all the tools we have at our disposal to keep and maintain and restore a sense of balance to this community. We're always going to have rentals, always going to have summer houses, but we always need to have the people who are going to show up and do the work and live in this community and make it actually a community. Thank you.
Chairman, I have continued the Zoom from my laptop. That system isn't working, but the people on Zoom are able to hear our conversation, so they're asking questions again.
And I do stay open. My question is this: last year, a short-term rental ordinance was brought before the voters, and it was pulled before town meeting because it was not ready. There wasn't enough support. We're back at the same place we were last year. We have a short-term rental ordinance in front of us again. There's still lots of questions. You as a board can't make a recommendation because of your conflicts. Is it really gonna go to town meeting vote again this year, or is it gonna get pulled again? Because we can't come to a conclusion that it's ready.
Katrina, I can answer that. There will always be questions, no matter what. And I for one feel this has been a really productive evening. We've gotten a lot of good ideas and a lot of good questions. And my hope is that we will continue to tinker with this and continue this public hearing next Monday with some further revisions to it based on comments that we've gotten. Although this board, because of the conflict of interest of 3 of its members, is unable to make a recommendation with the board, still we've talked to legal counsel and we can put it on, we can put it on the warrant without a recommendation.
So I think that and I'm on the warrant committee.
Right.
And I can speak for myself. I've got a conflict.
Right.
And there are many on the warrant committee that have a conflict.
And
so I think that you will see that there are many in the community that are involved with renting. So It's a very conflicted article. My next question is, how long can you tinker with it before it's? We have a date.
March 21st.
Is the last tinkering? And after that last tinkering, does it then go to a public hearing again?
No, it will be all hearing down next month.
It'll be all tinkered and
It'll
hearing down.
tinker out, and then it will go on the warrant for a vote
It
in
may.
May 7th.
It may or may not go on. Because it didn't go on the warrant last year. It was pulled.
Yes, you're right, it was pulled. I will say further that the warrant committee may need to wrestle with some of the issues that we did in terms of conflict of interest.
And the conversation have already started.
Yeah.
Who makes the, excuse me, who makes the determination on whether it goes to town meeting? If it's not completely figured out.
Yes, seniors, I select side and then the voters decide. And then
That much I understand. I just wanted to know how, if there's obviously some people that have, concerns. I just wanted to know, is it one or two people are part of the select board, or they have to
hire
recuse themselves? Okay, because with the conflict of interest. Thank you.
What is the
The
formal
distinction is-
amendment process?
Board will not say we recommend as,
Mute me.
we will just say it's on the rule. Understand, yeah.
There's somebody on Zoom there, Mr. Ford.
Am I on? Yes, thank you for your time.
You're
Like
muted.
others that have spoken tonight, I am a property tax payer, but not a local resident. And I would just.
Dan, you're muted.
We're muted.
We're muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Like others that have spoken tonight, I'm a taxpayer, but not a full-time resident. Listening to this conversation tonight bothers me on a couple of levels. One, I'll speak for myself. I think many other seasonal residents would concur. I'd like nothing more than to help solve the affordable housing problem on Northeast Harbor or in Mount Desert on the island. It is a problem. There's no doubt it's a problem. But I'm not sure that this is by itself the solution. And I've heard others say it's part of a bigger plan. I don't know what that bigger plan is, but this in and of itself doesn't solve the problem. I fear that this creates a wedge between the full-time residents and the summer vacationers and homeowners. And I propose that we put a committee together, including year-round residents as well as seasonal residents, to figure out how to work this problem together. The seasonal residents are really important to the community. Well, we all know that. Several years ago during COVID, the Summer Residents Association contributed money to the businesses in town to keep them going when it was a really, really tough time. I think we can work this problem together if we work together. We're not the only ones having this issue. Bar Harbor's not alone. Maine's not alone. There are other places around the country that are facing this exact same issue. Affordable housing is a huge issue in this country. I'm in a business in which I serve housing, and it's a huge problem. We all know that. I'd suggest we come together as a group with residents and non-residents that are seasonal, figure out how to work this together. Let's put something on the table that we can work with. But what we're doing right now is creating a wedge between those who have vacation rentals or seasonal places and those that are local residents. I don't get a vote. I get that. I understand that. The local residents will make that decision if this goes to a vote. But I think we can work together and solve the problem. Thank you.
your property, a flat fee.
Sorry, I got a bounce back. Okay, go ahead.
A flat fee if you rent your property, regardless of if you're seasonal, primary, not, whatever, a flat fee that you meet life safety requirements. Do that in year one, now you actually know how many rentals you have rather than arbitrarily guessing. And pulling, I don't know if you're pulling from AirDNA or STR Insights or any of the data sources of which you're pulling the rentals from. But they all just scrape it from Airbnb and VRBO and the property management sites, so that's why they're all inaccurate, slightly different. However, the life safety and the make us get a license, to me, seems fair across the board. Where you get into different levels, I continue to come back. I know, to some point earlier, I'm biased. I'm not a voter here. I'm a taxpayer. I don't live on the island. But does that mean that I have, like, what is the need to separate somebody that's not a primary residence and somebody that is? Does that mean that I have worse guests because I don't? I mean, I do this full time. I have noise monitoring in every property. I vet our gas rental agreements, security deposits, average age of in their early 50s. Like, they're not party people. I do this full time, so I would argue from a tech standpoint, from an operation standpoint, from a system standpoint, I have this nailed down better than anybody. Does that mean that my guests, because I don't live, it's not my primary residence, are worse guests? Is that why we're separating primary residence versus not? Is it a guest quality issue? So I think when you get into the tiers, that would be a pushback. And then there's been this whole, and you can look it up in Austin, you can look it up in North Carolina, you can look it up in North Conway, you can look it up regardless. Yes, there is the Maine, you may regulate. However, the amount of lawsuits going on right now, pushing back on it, find me a town that has put a cap that is doing it successfully. There are towns that have put caps, and every one of them is back. There is no town saying, hey, look at us, we put a cap.
Sounds like the ones that are doing it are.
All right, thank you.
I'm a full-time resident. And I just don't see that this ordinance has the backing of the validity of the purpose that you're doing this. So again, like Robert said, you're putting the cart before the horse. I think the ordinance should be thrown out completely. We are full-time residents. We shouldn't be told what we can and what we can't do on our own property. We live here full-time. We pay our taxes. And I really think that you don't have any kind of studies or validity that backs up what you're stating as your purpose for the ordinance in the first place. So until you can give us really set things, validity of community, with quality of life. And I understand this gentleman is having an issue with his neighbor. Maybe the police is something that has to be brought into his situation, but I don't think this ordinance has to bring into all of us that live here for full-time residents. I think the ordinance should be thrown out completely. That's my thoughts. Okay.
Thanks. All right. I think it's time to wrap this up. We will be having one more.
Isaac Iverson, resident of Mount Desert. I think we should, as a board, look at the Luso agreements and rules that have been made in the past. In the 80s, I recall some rule that disallowed Mount Desert of having any mobile home parks. And mobile homes are banned from individual lots here as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's probably one of the most affordable things that we can enforce to do is have more occupancy on each individual lot. And this is skipping way ahead to the end result. One other thing I think we should really address, and I don't think I know Mr. Sprague's had some issues, but we really need to be able to keep the money that is in our community. And so as soon as these rentals that are not managed and owned by Mainers they're bringing the money to a different part of the world that never happened before. So we've got an escaping monetary issue, and that doesn't increase our healthy lives here at all. So if we can address that with this type of arbitrary rule, it'd be great. Thank you so much.
This is gonna be a long process. We never claimed this would solve the problem. It's a beginning, to iterative process, we can change it in here. It changed by special town meeting. This is not permanent, just not gonna leave scars on the piece, okay? So you know, again, you're voting. We're not passing this, you're passing this or not. Okay?
I think Noel might have something to say about the mobile homes, because there's been some discussion about that recently.
Yeah, so mobile homes are. And there is one zone in town where you can be. But I think Isaac makes some good points, as I was trying to say earlier, as we're going through the comprehensive plan, that's a great time to really do. Time to be involved in thinking about those things. Before you end though, my last suggestion would be just to bullet point out, like, here's where we are tonight, this is what you're thinking about doing. This is how it's gonna get from here to town meeting, just to highlight, so everybody's clear. This movie.
Can you speak to also just one other thing? The effort to change the state law as far as local occupancy taxes and such to eventually keep some of that. This is another question. I don't know anything about.
Well, I mean, I can speak to the fact that there is a need to have something in the state of Maine that would allow municipalities to keep their tax revenues to some degree in the community. A lot of it's local option sales tax is what people usually refer to. And you cannot do that in Maine. So here, if you have a tax that's associated with an overnight accommodation, that money will then go to the state and it doesn't get to stay locally. So there are some initiatives underway. We're working with the NBI Housing Solutions Initiative, if anybody wants to look it up. It's a good group of project partners trying to work together on NBI and in the Acadia region to try to figure out what we do holistically about this housing issue, and that's one of the things that we're starting to do.
Can I just have a clarify? It just brings up with the warrant committee, like I'm one of that potentially have just inherited some property that I'm not gonna be able to keep. If we don't do something, but I know the warrant committee is in that same boat. What, and I would know the answer to this, if we can't recommend and the warrant committee cannot have enough people to approve this, what happens?
So I understood if they're able to, as we are, put it on the warrant with no recommendation.
Our vote is actually numbered, so if there are 10 people on the warrant committee, 5 vote in favor, 5 vote against. You see that in the warrant. What?
Yes, recommend, right?
Right, and those that have abstained, the number that abstained will be on there as well. So you'll be able to see that in the warrant.
Right. Just like we can't make that recommendation, it will be in the warrant. The board of selectmen don't.
But you will see our vote. You'll see our vote.
So what if it's no? Will it go on the warrant?
Yep, basically. I'm Bill Lichtenstein, chair of the warrant committee, co-chair of the warrant committee. Jerry's on the other, on Zoom.
Thank you, Bill.
Basically, we'll put the article in the positive and then we'll have our discussion. All we are doing is placing it on the warrant. We do the same thing with the marina. We make no recommendation. But when it comes time to the town meeting floor, we make the recommendation in the positive, and then we have the discussion, and then we vote on it. So I see no issue in the Board of Selectmen or the warrant committee not making any recommendation. And back to what the chair has said all night long, it's the voters who will decide. John speaks clearly, and I hope everyone else understands that. And if you are a voter, we are the voters. Yes, we've had a lot of taxpayers in the room, and they do make a large part of our community, make our schools stay open and do lots of good things. But only the true voters, and I think that's been something that's come up tonight, where people try to differentiate. Is it your primary residence? Are you a resident? That was some of the clarity. I think it's very important that people understand voters and primary residents are often the same thing.
Thank you. And so I would just say, I believe the next step is like, we've listened, we've heard, we've gathered, we've taken notes, we've recorded, we have an amazing secretary that's gonna help us. And I hope we get to see the questions, at least view them, even though we can't answer them. So my understanding is that we will continue this next week. Theoretically, we would have potentially a new draft that we're gonna work hard this week, and I mean, I think I heard some pretty amazing things. And it may not be ready, like Trina said, we don't know, but I mean, as far as where we're going forward for this to be voted on by the public, is we'll do our best to incorporate what's best for our community, and I think that was a great conversation, great piece and balance. And then we'll bring it back next week. We'll try to listen some more, but by next week, we won't be able to make changes to that because there's a 45-day window where it can't change it.
Jerry Miller online had a question.
No, I'm done.
Hey, Jerry, go ahead.
No, I'm all set.
Wait a second here.
I'm all set. And now we can't hear you guys.
I thought was I would like to ask, when the discussion to put together this ordinance, I never read anywhere in there about renting seasonally to workforce housing. Is that something that, you know, I just think that there's some issue there if you're actually asking somebody to pay for a license, if you're trying to assist the community by providing workforce housing. This would on my day, but how would somebody like myself who wants to go only from like the end of April to the beginning of November, or no license? No license. Because I am working, okay.
Just to clarify, if you're renting to multiple people, less than 28 days, then you have to get license. If you're renting to one person for the season, like 3 months or whatever, then that's not a short term. So you wouldn't need it.
But if you have a combination of 2 1-week rentals and 1 6-week, then you have to get the short.
So yes.
But it's not really clear because it says consecutive, but it doesn't say to one person.
That's kind of
We
like.
can clarify that next to Trina.
And catch, maybe if it's a couple or something, you know, maybe no children. I mean, there's a lot of men and women that come here to go, they work for the national park seasonally. They work maybe as a husband and wife team, you know, chambermaiding.
Yep.
Hotels, or wait staff, parking. What's that? Yeah, there you go.
Missed his chance.
This time I have a real question. We're only getting about can you hear me? We're only getting about a quarter of what anybody's saying in the room. And it's fading in and out, and it would be really wise to convene this till sometime when we can all hear each other. Did you guys, now you're frozen.
Jerry, put it in the chat.
We have no volume. Thank you. Still no volume.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need a We don't need a, we need a better cable system. They're rolling over the cables. It's gonna. It's not a good time, Darrell.